Okay. And I just want to welcome everyone. Thanks for joining our June 4th, 2021 mass meeting on Zoom. Everybody watching us on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, masscosmos.org. Our topics can range from current events to scientific discoveries, anything happening at NASA, SpaceX, and much more coming from aerospace and the scientific communities. After some introductory topics today, we'll start talking about Mars missions. We're going to do a little sidebar to talk a little bit about the Chinese space station. And then we'll move on to SpaceX topics, NASA stories, and then a brief discussion of space tourism. And finally, a quick briefing about the OSIRIS-REx mission departing from the asteroid Bennu, and a little bit about the delay of the James Webb Space Telescope.
Okay.
You know, you knew that was going to happen. It's going to launch, it was going to launch on Halloween, but now it's going to be a little bit mid-November. So we'll see how we do. Our meetings can be several hours long. However, if you're interested in a specific topic that we're discussing, you can always go on YouTube and click any of the topic links provided. And again, thanks for joining us. So let's get started. I think I'm going to warn you, I'm a little bit like a kid in a candy store when it comes to wanting to share stories with you guys. So I got a lot of stuff here, and well, I might just have to do a little bit editing on the fly to keep it down to a manageable length. We'll see. So our last meeting was April 23rd. You know, who thought the 6 weeks have already whizzed by? And this is our, let's see, maybe about our 11th meeting on YouTube or on Zoom. So we'll have to see how we do. This is our 70th meeting, yes, and 11th on Zoom. So we're quickly approaching our 10th anniversary. Our first meeting was on July 21st, 2011. And it's kind of interesting that we were talking about commercial space then, and we'll still be talking about commercial space tonight. So some things never change. So first thing, I'm going to share my screen and see how we do. I've got a lot of short little 10-minute video clips to show, so I'm going to make sure that I optimize for video clips, and we'll see how things go. So let's see, let me get in presentation mode. How's that coming across for you guys?
Good.
Okay. So this is all the missions that have tried to land on Mars or successfully landed. If you can tell a little bit, the gray ones here, these three from Russia, Beagle and Schiaparelli were European missions. They're a little bit grayed out, meaning they weren't that successful. The full white ones here are all NASA ones. You know, again, until China managed to land Zhurong, we were the only one pretty much that landed on Mars. And if you notice Zhurong, it's kind of located right between Perseverance, which is this Mars 2020 dot, and the old Viking 2 that dates back to the 1970s. So we'll see. Mars will be kind of our main topic tonight. But before we get into that, Andy Weir, who wrote the book about Mars called The Martian, then went on to write a book called Artemis that dealt with some stuff going on the moon, and he's coming out with a new one called Project Hail Mary. And let's see. It's, I don't want to give any spoilers out, but here it says you can share that some guy wakes up in a hospital and he's trying to figure out who he is and what he's supposed to be doing. I really like Andy's science fiction because he really delves into the science behind his storyline. And I think this book won't spoil there. You know, I think without putting out too much of a spoiler, I can say it has maybe a little bit to do with some sort of bug that might be stealing the energy of the sun. We'll see. That might be cryptic enough to not be a spoiler. So any of you guys ever read the book Martian?
Nope.
Nope.
Okay, well, I think even if you saw the movie, you'd enjoy it. So, you know, it's kind of funny that Andy Weir started out by just publishing chapters of it on the internet for free or for a penny or something like that. So he's kind of a self-made author. Pretty good guy. And my other little miscellaneous thing is, I remember we talked a little bit about the sun ramping up for a new sunspot cycle. We're ramping up for the cycle 25, which is supposed to peak at about 115 sunspots, maybe in July of 2025. So we got maybe about 4 years before the peak comes about. And since our last meeting, we've got two values here that came in. June, let's see, May of this year, we had a value of 21 spots, which is higher than what they predicted, maybe 12. And let's see, April had a value of 24.5, whereas a predicted value of 10. That's still pretty close to the predicted red line here. So, you know, there was that one scientist that instead of 115 peak, he was predicting something over 230. So you know, early in here, if you look in November of 2020, it looked like the thing was really going a lot higher than what was predicted, but now it's kind of calmed down. So I think odds are a betting value of 115. So we'll see how we do. I'll keep maybe every few months show you how we're doing. Now, one of the worries about going into a sunspot cycle is the solar flares. A lot of times will happen when sunspots are active too. It's not a one-for-one correlation, but you know, one of the things our Artemis program going back to the moon, maybe as early as 2024, is going to have to kind of worry about that. And the prediction from a scientist in England here says that if we're going to send any moon missions, we ought to send them in the early 2020s rather than the late 2020s. He did mention that between Apollo 16 and Apollo 17, there was a solar storm strong enough to have killed the Apollo astronauts if they were maybe doing a moonwalk on the moon. So that was back in 1972. And I checked 1972, that was solar cycle 20, and solar cycle 20 peaked at maybe 192 spots in a given month. So we'll have to make sure that that Orion capsule is radiation hardened, but if these guys are out on the surface in their own suits, that would be really dangerous for them.
A question, now that we have the SOHO satellites, how early of a warning system could we get before some bursts were coming our way?
You know, some of the solar flares and storms, it depends on how strong they are. They usually are like protons, and because protons are a lot heavier than light energy, it might take a day or more for it to actually reach Earth's orbit. So something like SOHO that's 90 degrees ahead of us in our orbit would kind of be able to see around the edge of the sun and see if a solar flare maybe was going to be rotating and heading towards Earth. So we might have a couple days notice. If it's a super strong storm, it might be a little less than that. It could be down to 3/4 of a day or something like that. So yeah, that's a good point that we do have solar probes that can kind of see what's coming the Earth's way and not visible to us at the moment. Okay, and I guess we're off to Mars. So first thing we'll talk about is the Zhurong rover. This is what it looks like. It's kind of like a Spirit and Opportunity sized rover. It's up on top of this little landing pedestal. It landed propulsively. You know, they weren't trying airbags or, you know, it was on, I think, a parachute for a little while, but then propulsively landed. It kind of drives off down these rails. And let's see, Zhurong is named after a Chinese fire god. And again, their rover is solar powered. So I think the warranty on their rover is only 90 days. And we'll see. You know, some of our 90-day rovers lasted many years. So we'll see how long Chinese ones do here. And, you know, I hate to admit it, but I wasn't really eating any Lucky Peanuts as their rover was landing. You know, you really didn't know when it was landing. I heard China didn't even announce it for maybe 20 minutes after it occurred. There was no live broadcast. And that might be a little bit due to the fact that they don't have that good of infrastructure around Mars. But I think China also is very, very self-conscious. They don't want to be embarrassed about anything. So a lot of times they don't announce their successes until after they've occurred. They're not willing to go live, kind of as we are here in the US. You know, the rover will be interesting. It's got a ground penetrating radar, be able to analyze the composition of rocks, multi-spectral cameras. And let's see, I think I've got a few first pictures here. This is what the rover looked like on top of the lander. And then here's the rails down to the surface. And they've got a little bit of video about how they were coming, maybe letting go of their heat shield and things like that. So let's see. This is another way of viewing the landing locations. This is more of a 3D map that shows Zhurong is over here, Perseverance is over here, Viking. Insight is still going along here. Our other rover, Curiosity's over here. Spirit and Opportunity have ceased functions. And of course, the Vikings aren't working. Pathfinder was our original kind of remote control sized rover.
I think Dean worked on that, didn't he?
Yeah, I think he wrote some of the programming for it.
Question.
Yeah.
So I didn't get a chance to read a lot of this. So the Chinese rover, when it came down for a landing, what methodology did they use? Was it similar to that of the first ones we did with the big balloons, or did they use something similar to Curiosity with the boosters?
You know, as far as I know, they used, you know, a heat shield, which is what our latest rovers have done. And then they did a parachute, which is part of our procedure too. But then as soon as they discarded the parachute, they came down propulsively. You know, our last two, Curiosity and Perseverance, landed propulsively, but you know, we had the sky crane where the rover was underneath the lander, whereas they landed with the rover on top, and it would drive off on rails. I think, yeah, we've never done propulsive landing with the rover on top, so it is a little different. And let's see, I think I got a little picture maybe of the rover rollout. Let's see, maybe I think right here, it's kind of if you look at it, it's pretty grainy and black and white and things like that. You know, I think it'll improve once they establish a better connection with the Earth as far as transmission. But we'll see how forthcoming they are with their data. I think sometimes China's a little tight-lipped too on results that they've gotten from their probes.
So they don't have any satellites going around Mars.
Well,
that we
they
know of.
they have the one that was part of this mission. It was a lander, a rover, and an orbiter. So the orbiter is still up there circling it, and that's how the rover and the lander send their information back to the Earth, is through their orbiter.
Okay.
But they have just a single one, whereas I think the Europeans and the US, we might have as many as 4
Mhm.
or more orbiters. So we can kind of, you know, catch data links much more frequently than they can.
Yeah.
So it's been a real roller coaster thing here for China. They've done a mission of landing on the backside of the moon, landing on the front side of the moon, and sending a sample of the moon back to Earth. Now, their first attempt at landing on Mars is successful, and they not only land, but they have a rover that rolls out. So they're really moving along gangbusters. Their other thing, I'm going to kind of digress in a China discussion here, is that they've also put up their first or their latest space station.
Hello, it's Scott Manley here.
So I was going to use Scott Manley to kind of do some of the briefing, save some of my voice here. So let me know if you have any trouble hearing it here, and we'll see what he has to say.
Right, China's space program took a massive step forward with the launch of their first module of their forthcoming modular space station. This took off from Wenchang spacecraft launch facility on Hainan Island. It lifted off on a Long March 5B rocket. This is, I believe it's the largest rocket that China has right now. It is a cryogenically fueled rocket which has 4 boosters around the outside burning RP1 and liquid oxygen. That gives them the high thrust to get them off the pad. And then the core is liquid hydrogen and oxygen. And this was able to carry the 20-ton module all the way into orbit without any further staging. So that core stage where the engines were lit on the ground made it all the way to orbit. And we don't see that very often. Like the last spacecraft that really did that was the Space Shuttle, right? It used to be all the rage, of course, back in the 60s or 50s when they weren't sure that they could actually light rocket engines in flight. But yeah, obviously a great step forward for them to get this into space. So this core is going to be part of a multi-module space station. There's at least 2 other modules which will be coming in the future. But before those arrive, we're going to get cargo and crew delivered. So it launched into a 42-degree orbit because although the initial launch site, which was Wangchang Island, is about 20 degrees from the equator, the crew launch facilities is Jiuquan spaceport, and that launches on the Long March 2F. That is the current launch vehicle for the Shenzhou. So they had to launch it to the southeast so that when it hit orbit, it had like a 42-degree inclination. And that way it can be reached from these 2 major Chinese launch facilities. So right now it was put into orbit. It's currently raising its orbit into a circularized orbit. The booster is going to decay over the coming weeks. And then we're going to see it send up a cargo spacecraft. So the cargo spacecraft is the Tianzhu, and that launch is also from Wangchang, and that is actually based on their smaller space stations. So China has previously flown 2 space stations, Tiangong 1 and 2, and these were very small space stations. Their launch mass was something about 10 tons, which is comparable to that of a Dragon or a Starliner, albeit that Dragon and Starliner are optimized to keep crew alive for re-entry, whereas these stations are just optimized to provide space for the crew to do their science and experiments and get experience in space. So the first module of this new space station, which actually I believe may be called Tiangong when it's completely assembled, the module itself is called Tianhe. I hope my pronunciation isn't too bad. I know it's very hard to do Mandarin properly, but I'm going to endeavor because you got to respect this. So yeah, the core module, I believe, is pretty much a licensed copy or derivative of the Russian-Soviet DOS design, which is what Salyut 1 and onwards were based on. There's these modules which have a very similar design. They were used in many of the Russian stations. It was the core module of the Mir space station, and the Zvezda service module on the International Space Station is also an example of this design. So Tianhe is going to include multiple docking ports. It has 5 docking ports. It includes power. It has propulsion, so it can maintain orbit. It has all the avionics and sensors and everything it needs to fly, and it has room for some equipment racks, has life support, so it will be able to support crew until the other modules arrive. So yeah, we're going to see a Tianzhu dock with it, and then in June we're going to see a launch from Jiuquan, which will have a crew of 3, I believe, on a Shenzhou, and that will go to the station and dock to the Nadir port. And then they'll start, doing science in space. I mean, they'll probably be doing more engineering preparing it. It is interesting that this module, although it was based on a design that was supposed to be flown on the Proton rocket, the Long March 5 has a wider fairing. So there's a lot of stuff that's attached on the surface that makes it sort of bulkier inside the fairing. When the Russian modules went up to the space station, they did have to do a lot of EVAs to attach stuff that couldn't fit because it had to fit inside the fairings, whereas there's a bunch of stuff here that's already there, already deployed, which I think will simplify some of their operations. It includes a robotic manipulator arm as well, and that will be essential when the modules come later on. So the core module is about 20 tons. Sometime next year, there are 2 science modules called Wangtian and Mengtian. Again, pronunciation question. Now, there are 5 docking ports. There's the fore and aft, there's port and starboard, and there's a nadir port on the bottom. And by the way, on the top side where you might think there's a docking port, that is where the hatch is for the airlock. So if they need to do EVAs, they will be using that. But only the port and starboard docking adapters don't have the navigational and communications gear that will be needed for the automated docking of the new modules. So those are designed to come in and dock to the forward port, and then the crew will use the manipulator arm to undock them and shift them around to the port or starboard. And when all three modules are together in space, I think the space station will have a mass of about 60 tons. Although, based on quotes I've heard, it's not clear if that includes the mass of Shenzhou as well. I suspect that the whole thing is probably 20 ton per module. That would make most sense given the capabilities of the Long March. So, look. This is going to be a 60-ton space station, making it the fourth largest space station ever built after Mir, International Space Station and Skylab. But it is going to be 6 times larger than what China has previously flown, and it is open to international partners. They've already announced experiments that are going to fly from many European nations. Only the US has this, political block that stops the US from working with any Chinese space program, whereas other countries don't have this, and they're already coming up with plans. One thing that, however, in the last few weeks, of course, again, Russia was making a lot of noise about abandoning the International Space Station, perhaps working with the Chinese. That was something they very specifically said. And according to Anatoly Zuk, they actually made some approaches to China to say, can you change the inclination of your space station? Because 42 degrees is fine for China to get there. It's fine for the US to get there, but it's too far south for any of the Russian launch facilities. Baikonur is 45 degrees north, but if you remember, it has to launch slightly to the northeast to avoid overflying China. Now, sure, I guess if they were working with China, they might get permission, but I don't think that's going to happen, because that would require like a 3-degree dogleg maneuver, which is probably beyond what Soyuz will manage, and I don't think they're planning to bring any of the new spacecraft to Baikonur. Yeah, not sure how that works out, but yeah, it's obviously going to be interesting to watch. Now, so right now it's on this 42-degree orbit, which brings it over. It won't fly over Britain. You'll be able to see it if you're in the south of Europe. You'll be able to see it over most of the US. I think Canada's too far south. Right now, if you look up in the morning, that's the time to see it. That's the time if you're this far north. In the south, you'll see it during in the evening. So the launch of the Chinese space station now means that we are going to be seeing the return of Chinese astronauts to orbit, or taikonauts as some people like to call them. And right now we have 11 people on the International Space Station, which is a high for a very long time. But the record of people simultaneously in space is 13, which was like back in 2009, where we had a space shuttle with 7 and 2 fully loaded Soyuz crews, which was 6. So it's possible later this year we will see more people in space than we've ever seen before. We'll possibly have 3 people on the Chinese space station, and it's possible we will have 2 Dragon spacecraft and maybe 1 or 2 Soyuz. Now, it could be that we have 2 Dragon spacecraft docked to the space station, but in September, Inspiration 4 will be flying their crew of 4 on their own unique orbit, while Crew 2 is still docked to the space station. Crew 3 are going up, I believe, in October, so that's another option. So I think this year we're going to break the record on the number of humans simultaneously in space, and also we're going to have 2 space stations occupied at the same time, which, this is the sci-fi future we want, right? We want to have lots of people working in space stations and doing things. It's also worth pointing out that the Chinese station is being built using docking adapters, which are derived from the International Docking System Standard, which is itself largely compatible with the APAS, the Androgynous Peripheral Attachment System. And this means that mechanically, the docking systems on Dragon and Starliner are broadly similar and possibly compatible with those on the Chinese station. Now, That's not going to happen for political reasons right now, but you never know. In the future, maybe there's some way to bring China's work into the international community in a way that the US is happy, and we get this glorious future of humanity working in space together and solving all our problems. That's the future I want. So I'm going to say, congratulations to China on getting your first module into space. I hope that things go well, and I hope that we can, in fact, figure out how to work together in space. I'm Scott Manley. Fly safe.
Cool.
So guys, what do you think there?
I like it. I like it a lot. And I like the way he expressed all that information. Again, I want China to go gangbusters. Absolutely. I'm really happy about that. I totally agree with them. Again, the eventual goal is this world to work together and do space exploration and figure these things out all together. I mean, we're in the right direction all around. I'm really glad they're being this successful. It's helping us be motivated too. And always competition's a great thing too. But honestly, I do like they're using standards similar to that of the space station and all the other stuff. It's really good to look forward to this stuff. It's great.
Hopefully
Yeah,
it'll
I think
transfer to
it's-
working good together on the planet Earth.
Yeah, it's kind of ironic that Russia can't reach the station, but the docking ports are actually compatible with the United States.
Yeah.
Now, did any of you guys get involved when the Long March 5 rocket that he talked about that took up this first Tianhe module? That was coming back and gonna probably not all burn up in the atmosphere, and everybody was concerned about it. Did any of you guys track that?
No.
Yeah, they had me kind of watching it. The only thing we had is because the Long March rocket body was like in an orbit that got up to 41.5 degrees. We were kind of lucky in Chicago here. We're at 42 degrees north. So technically, I don't think the rocket could have hit Chicago, but it actually was pretty close. And China kind of shows that they're not really a good participant when you put up a rocket that size and you put no provisions on trying to deorbit it in the ocean. You just kind of let chance take its turn there. So just not sure on China and how good of an actor they are in the world stage.
I agree.
Part of the
Yeah.
concern is building out the space station is going to take 11 rocket launches. Now, they're not all going to be Long March 5s, but I think every time they launch one of the big modules, that's probably going to be a Long March 5 rocket. So we're probably going to go through this 2, 3, maybe more than that in the next couple of years, because they want to complete this space station by 2022. So they got lucky this time, but I'm not sure about the next time.
Well, I thought it was interesting, cryogenics for launch. I mean, that's pretty cold stuff.
Yeah. And that's they had the solid boosters on the side. I think those were kind of like more kerosene based, and then they had the center module has hydrogen and oxygen. Usually only the US rockets use that because it's really tough to handle that stuff. You got to be able to handle some pretty cold temperatures.
Yeah.
So, the Chinese space station is bringing up the issue of, should we cooperate with them or not? There was this little article here about, I think, some representative from Virginia, who's the new chair of the Space Committee, talking that, until they get rid of this Wolf Amendment, the Wolf Amendment is what prohibits NASA from working with China. Repeal of it, there's talk of doing it, but The only thing is that they're, the way China acts about Taiwan and Hong Kong and some of the forced labor camps that they're running with some of the indigenous people in China, they're just not real good players on the world stage. And,
Well-
we maybe get some concessions from them. Maybe we ought to keep them at arm's distance. I don't know.
Well, what did
Keep
they,
it
what did they tell Joe Biden a few years back that China will own the United States within 50 years?
Yeah.
So it's hard to, when you start from that platform, it's kind of hard.
Yeah, how'd you like to walk into a car dealership and have them say, I'm going to own you in a few years,
Yeah.
Would you want to buy a car from those people?
Probably not.
Yeah, so we'll see. So again, China is open to international cooperation with the space station. They're working through the UN, I guess, to do it. And there may be some European astronauts training with the Chinese taikonauts, but so far, no cooperation with the US.
But keep in mind, whatever they agree to will be on their terms and not your terms or the community of man's terms. It will be their terms.
Yeah, and
We
that's,
had many
And-
dealings with the Chinese at General Motors, and they were not pleasant people to deal with.
yeah, there's such a kind of a different type of government, where they're pretty much run by just a pretty small elite group. Yeah, I agree with you, Silvio. They're probably good at staying the course for 10 years on a project, but
Not
they're not very good on listening, I guess, to criticism. I still remember the leader of China was a little upset that somebody compared him to Winnie the Pooh. So Disney cartoons that have Winnie the Pooh in them are banned in China, things like that. So kind of shows you that they don't have much of a sense of humor.
No. And given the fact, they've always copied everything from everyone. So this success of theirs is really at the expense of someone else.
Yeah.
And they,
See here now, they're kind of copying a Russian designed module. Hopefully they did buy the rights to it, just didn't steal the plans. We'll see. But here's another little short article about Russia and China cooperating on a moon base and asking if anybody internationally wants to cooperate. What they call it is their International Lunar Research Station, the ILRS.
Fancy name, yeah.
And, again, they're planning to build a base at the south pole of the moon, mainly to do resource utilization, like trying to mine ice and other minerals. And, we'll see how they do. It's going to be this possible combination of Russia and China versus the US and our Artemis Accords. The good thing about the Artemis Accords is we had a couple more countries join. I don't know if you heard that, let's see, these aren't
So,
real powerhouse
I get a feeling
countries.
it's like
but-
Ice Station Zebra 2.0 here, between Artemis and ILRS.
Yeah. So South Korea and New Zealand have joined the Artemis Accords, and Brazil might join soon. So, that adds quite a few, add them to quite a few European countries, like I think pretty much all of the ESA countries and Japan are part of Artemis Accords. And again, Artemis is pretty broad, and it just says that, you should be a good participant, you should share your plans, you should kind of, make sure you work with other people to let them know what you're doing. And so far, China very rarely performs like that.
I know Russia and China basically have a political agenda that runs their worlds, if you will. By no means have they been, ethically strong in regards to what things have been reporting back, on humanitarian level for certain things they do. But at the same time, at an engineering, science, aerospace level, I have to applaud their efforts, if anything else, that they want to do something like this and create more innovation to do lunar exploration or lunar landscape estating, if you will. And again, the other countries involved if possible. And I know, I'm not naive. I'm sure there's competition involved with that against what America was doing. But at the same time, I just like seeing both sides just taking the extra effort to do this and going forward to help us, explore space like it's supposed to be and get us out of, the lower orbit world.
Right. I agree with you, Keith, that, if we cooperate, I think we can do a lot more than what we can do competitively. So, yeah, it would be nice to kind of have a united front as far as the Earth and exploring space and doing things. So let's see, I'm going to move back to Mars if you guys don't mind. And let's see, the Ingenuity helicopter is already through its sixth flight. Have you guys been following a little bit of what it's been up to?
Mhm.
Yep.
Okay, so let's see. I think I got a quick summary here. But
It's hard to believe that Mint Mobile can
Sorry
be
for the
good at just
commercial.
$15 a
Maybe I'll
month. So,
mute it.
as Mint's new owner, I brought in
another Scott Manley.
Hello, it's Scott Manley here. Most of the things I talk about are literally out of this world, but Ingenuity, the helicopter on Mars, is metaphorically out of this world. It has been blowing people's minds watching it fly for the last couple of months. Now, it's just completed its sixth flight, and moreover, it has transitioned from being a technology demonstrator to now trying to demonstrate operational use in a mission. And the most recent flight suffered some extreme stability issues as a bug was found in the onboard software. These video frames are from the onboard navigation camera, and you can see the vehicle oscillating back and forth. Now, it was able to maintain control, it used a bit more power, but it did eventually reach the landing site and safely touch down for future flights. And so this is roughly the state that we have today. You can see the red line shows the flight path that the Ingenuity helicopter has taken, whereas the white line is the path that the Perseverance has taken. So the blue dotted line area is where the initial test flights were supposed to occur, but first the rover had to deploy, and it scouted the area, found a location, and then the deployment required that it had to drop this container that was on the bottom. It was basically to protect the helicopter as they were trying to find a location. Then the helicopter sort of folded up on its side there, and it deploys. Well, it's animated. You can actually see it through a series of images. Finally, on the surface, it gets cut loose. It's held by the very top of those rotor blades. In fact, the entire structure is built around a vertical shaft. Everything is ultimately mounted back onto this shaft. Indeed, there's this image of a very early test version, which doesn't have any of the electronics or the batteries. It just has the rotors and the main structural object. And yeah, there's nothing there. Everything else is anchored to this. I believe the mass of the whole thing is about 1.75 kilograms. From tip to tip, those rotors are 1.2 meters or 4 feet in length, and there's a pair of rotors that rotate in opposite directions. And this really is a miniature helicopter. It has helicopter-style controls. If you buy a regular consumer drone, the propellers are more or less molded plastic. They're fixed and they don't change. And you control those by adjusting the motor speeds. In the case of Ingenuity, it is a proper helicopter rotor system which uses pitch control. It has collective and cyclic pitch, an independent control of both sets of rotors. So if it needs to rotate in one direction or the other, it can slow down one motor and speed the other up. If it needs to rotate, it can adjust the pitch in a cyclic manner. If it needs to go up or down, it can adjust the pitch overall. On top of the center rod, you've got the solar panel that provides power for the whole system. It can take days to charge up for a flight. And below the rotors, the first thing you run into is the structure supporting the landing legs and the electronics box. And you might think of an electronics box as being a box that contains electronics. Well, no, this is actually a box made of electronics. It's a bunch of circuit boards that are all folded together, connected by ribbon cables to make a box. What does a box of electronics contains? It contains the batteries in the core. It turns out that batteries are probably the most temperature sensitive component, so having those in the middle protected by the electronics actually helps a little. Yeah, the electronics are sort of laid out obviously pretty logically. One end you've got your battery interface board, which talks directly to the power, and the power also talks to your flight control board. And flight control, you have a processor in there that does a lot of the sort of broad logic, but there's discrete chunks of the hardware which are more dedicated to actual in-flight processing. There's an FPGA which does the image processing and the integration of all the different sensors and commands the helicopter. I mean, a lot has been said about the amount of hardware which is commercial off-the-shelf technology here, but the FPGA, as I understand it, is a space-rated part with extra radiation hardening. The communications, by the way, uses the Zigbee standard, which is sort of a hobbyist communication standard, but it's worked very well. The sensor package includes a navigation camera, which is relatively low resolution, it's monochrome and it more or less looks straight down. But then there's a return to Earth camera, which is like 12 megapixels and full color. And that took this rather splendid image. And it's actually sort of fortuitous that we got this image, because normally the return to Earth camera looks more or less at the ground, but because of the oscillations, the vehicle was had raised its front up far enough that it could see the edge of the crater in the distance. I mean, for reference, on the left there you can see a sort of metallic sphere. That is one of the feet, and if you think about it, that should be below where the camera is. So because this was a technology demonstrator, it had a pretty low bar for demonstrating success, and they achieved this very early. They took off, they rose a couple of meters, and they rotated. They showed that they could actually hover in the atmosphere of Mars. And then they expanded the envelope. They went higher to about 5 meters, and there was also a traverse of a few meters and return to the landing site. I mean, it's pretty cool that they could demonstrate hovering in what the human body would consider to be a vacuum, but it does help that it had 1/3 atmosphere of pressure. The third flight was where they really started to demonstrate the traverse capabilities, ascended to 5 meters and then headed 50 meters north and then headed 50 meters south back to its landing site to perform a touchdown in more or less the same place. The helicopter flew at a speed of about 2 meters per second, and the total time in the air was about 1 minute and 20 seconds. And during this flight, it also was going to use its onboard cameras to collect images and send those back. And in one of those, we actually got a picture of the rover in the top left corner, albeit a very small, distant, grainy image. And that would have been an amazing way to cap off this mission, because with these 3 flights, they had successfully done everything that they were required to do. Because this was a technology demonstrator program, there was no notion that it would be really doing anything else beyond demonstrating the tech. But the plan had been that Perseverance would head off and do its own thing, leaving Ingenuity behind. And without Perseverance, there was no way for Ingenuity to talk back to the Earth and have a further mission. But it turns out that the area they'd landed in was interesting enough that the geologists actually wanted samples. So that gave the Ingenuity team more time to work with their little baby and you basically demonstrate its capabilities as a mission asset. The first thing they wanted to do was on Flight 4, try to scout a new landing location. That meant flying out about 80 meters and then coming back after taking photographs. But this also gave the rover a chance to do something it hadn't done before, and that was record video and audio at the same time of this. And so, this is incredibly hard to hear, but I'm going to boost the volume a little. Okay, so sure, that audio sounds like, the warp drive on the Enterprise or something. It's rather underwhelming, except for the fact that it's coming from the planet Mars. I mean, not only is this helicopter flying on Mars and the data's being recorded on Mars, but we're hearing the sound, even though there's almost no atmosphere on Mars. There's just enough to carry the sound of these motors working really hard in that thin air to keep this thing airborne. Incidentally, one of the things that constrains how long they can stay in the air isn't the amount of battery power, it's how hot those motors get, because without a thick atmosphere around them, it's very hard for them to get rid of the heat they generate while operating. The temperature of the motors apparently rises by about 1 degree centigrade every second. Anyway, speaking of the thin atmosphere, there's another thing that you can catch in this video that's been processed by Andrea Plesch. You can see a cloud of dust getting kicked up underneath the vehicle as it passes over, right? And bouncing it back and forth, and it's just barely visible. In fact, I'm so sure YouTube is going to destroy it. This is an enhanced version. What you do is you take a fixed frame and you subtract it from every single other frame, and you basically take that difference, blur it a little so that you can actually see the clouds. This is the landing, right? You see the clouds getting blown up and then dissipating. But for the operations team, this flight was all about finding a new landing site, and it flew the distance, it used its navigation cameras, and it took a bunch of pictures, and it indeed identified that the site was good. It looked clear. Now, they can look at it from orbit and say, that looks clear, but when you get up close, you never know whether there will be something that is big enough to threaten a small helicopter like this, but small enough to not be visible from orbit. So that flight went off without hitch, but most interestingly, in the landing,
See the dust
just
up?
look in the background, there's a dust devil on the right-hand side, and there's one slightly to the left of that. Now, the helicopter's going to come in a minute, and very near to where it lands, there's going to be another dust devil appearing. So that's like 3 dust devils caught in the same frame sequence because they were recording a helicopter. See the dust devil coming across right behind that helicopter? Totally unrelated phenomena in the background. And so that flight was on May 7th. Now, the next thing they wanted to do for operational demonstration was to show that they could fly and scout a site and land at it in a same flight. So that is what the plan was for May 22nd. And that's the flight path that they followed, except there was a problem. Again, this is the video sequence from the navigation cameras showing it wobbling all over the place as it tried to control itself. Now, as I said, those rotors are able to adjust their pitch to control the vehicle, but they're controlled by a computer, and the computer also gets information on the vehicle's attitude from the inertial measurement units. These are little gyroscopes and accelerometers that detect the vehicle attitude. The problem is, these are very similar to the kind of devices you might find on a cell phone, which are great for doing things like augmented reality, so you can play Pokemon Go, but their accuracy isn't great, so they need to be regularly corrected, and they do get these corrections by using the navigation camera. This is a video from Flight 2, and you can see the green spots that it's finding in the terrain that it's using to adjust its internal reference for where it is. So these images come in at specific times, and it compares it against the previous time, and that's how it's measuring its motion. Due to a glitch, they missed one frame, and then every subsequent frame got delivered with the timestamp off by 1 frame. And that meant that their control data was lagging their actual flight data. And that can make things very hard. If you've ever had control lag in a video game, you'll know that it can be very hard to control something. And sometimes you can learn to account for the control lag, but if the lag changes, then your entire model for reacting to the stimuli and then generating the correct inputs goes out the window, and you need to relearn it. And that's what's happened here. Thankfully, they had sufficient margin to maintain control. The downside was that because they were adjusting the pitch on the rotors more than they expected, they ended up using a lot more power, and that, of course, impacts the potential flight time. And then for the final landing, once they've picked their spot, they turned off the camera navigation and entirely relied on the IMU and the LiDAR to get them down safely to the surface. So hoping that problem doesn't affect them in the future, or maybe they can rectify it, but it'd be nice to see them flying again. I heard that the link that they're getting, the Zigbee connectivity with the rover, is better than they expected, so they think they've got better range. And that really translates into having more time to let the rover do its thing before they need to move to catch up with it. And you know, Perseverance has a long journey ahead of it. I hope that Lil Choppa can keep it company for as long as possible. I'm Scott Manley.
Okay. So pretty interesting, guys, huh?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I am kind of amazed that the those
Dave.
chips, those boards can withstand the temperature stresses and changes on Mars.
Yeah, I like how, you know, they save weight by making the walls of the electronics box out of electronics boards. And I heard on that flight that had the wobble in it there that it actually was maybe over 20 degrees one way and then the other way. So that thing was really rocking up in the air. You know, fortunately, it didn't rock over and lose control. But, you know, to show, whoops, let's see. So this is where the thing flew off from the original airfield here. You know, and Percy's been kind of working, just not doing a lot of traveling because, again, like he said, they found some interesting rocks there. But now that Percy is on Sol 104 today, all its equipment has now been past commissioning, and it's starting to drive down to the south. So I have a feeling it's going to start coming up and trying to catch up with the helicopter. But that'll be kind of cool now that the helicopter has moved from a tech demonstration to an operations plan. You know, it'll only fly every couple weeks, but hopefully it'll be able to keep up with Perseverance as it's heading off here. Now, let's see. Just to show you a little bit of Perseverance is over here, and the helicopter's a little bit to the southwest of it. Their goal is to kind of drive in a southerly direction, staying within this red area, and then kind of make a southwest trip. They want to get to a real high outcrop down here that they think this might be one of the places they want to take one of their first core samples. But it could take as much as 100 days for Perseverance to go from here all the way down to here. So we'll kind of keep our finger on its pulse there to see what it's up to. So let's see. One last thing I wanted to talk about Mars. You guys remember InSight, where we had the little mole trying to burrow itself into the ground? You guys remember that, right? You know, the bad thing is when I optimize for video sharing, I lose all the screens, and I'm not sure sometimes if everybody's all gone for coffee or not. You guys still there?
Yep.
Still here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Still there.
Yep, still here.
Well, that's reassuring to hear. But
All present and accounted for.
okay, I was just going to play a little bit of this. You know, maybe we'll cut it off a little bit since I don't want to drag this out too much. But it shows you a little bit maybe why the mole didn't get very deep. And
Thanks to Magellan TV for sponsoring today's video. InSight has been on Mars for over 2 years now and has reached the end of its original 2-year mission. However, scientists are so pleased with its success so far that NASA has agreed to extend the mission for another 2 years until December 2022. But what has InSight achieved in its time on Mars to lead to this extension? And what challenges might it face as it goes beyond its expected lifetime in the coming 2 years on the Red Planet? I'm Alex McColgan and you're watching Astrum. Together in this video we will find out what InSight has discovered, relive the highs and lows of InSight's time on Mars since we last checked in, and learn what the future holds for this incredible lander. By the end of this video, I hope I earn your like and subscription. If you watched my last video on this subject, you'll remember that the primary mission of InSight was to discover more about the formation of Mars by uncovering data about its internal formation and processes. To do this, it came equipped with a seismometer, called SEIS, to help it detect seismic activity like earthquakes or meteor impacts, and a heat probe and physical properties instrument, or the MOLE, which was to dig down 5 meters into Mars's surface to take the temperature of the red planet at different depths. However, there was a problem. When the MOLE was first deployed, it wouldn't dig. The MOLE was not designed with a drill, as this would have been too heavy to carry on the journey and would have needed a large cradle to stabilize it. Instead, scientists designed it to make its way into the surface of the planet using an internal hammering system. This would be lighter and more compact. However, the MOLE only got a few inches into the dry soil of Mars before getting stuck. It would hammer, but it wasn't going any deeper. Had it hit a rock?
Feels weird, picking it up. The legacy of that shield is...
Scientists had chosen the landing site especially because there were few large rocks in the area, and the MOLE had been designed in such a way that it should have been able to go around small rocks. The team took their time to think through what might be causing the problem, doing their best to create a replica of the situation on Earth using data from InSight's cameras. This wasn't a perfect process, as it's impossible to perfectly mimic the lower gravitational conditions of Mars on Earth, even with replicas made from scaled down lighter materials. But by October 2019, they had figured out that the likely problem was a lack of friction. They took photos of the hole with the MOLE partially backed out and saw that the soil in this spot was different from what they'd been expecting. The MOLE had been designed with loose soil in mind, the kind that would fall in around the MOLE as it dug and provide it with the friction it needed to dig deeper. However, although the surface you see here certainly appears loose and dusty, only a few inches deeper, the scientists realized there was a layer of cemented soil known as jury crust. The particles of jury crust stick together more tightly, which meant they weren't falling into the hole the MOLE was creating and weren't providing the friction necessary to dig deeper. Scientists hadn't realized that this type of soil was there when they picked the site for landing. But what were the scientists going to do about it? While InSight is equipped with a robotic arm, the top of the MOLE was not designed to be grabbed by this arm, so they couldn't just move it to another position. And as you can see here, there is a delicate cable designed to relay data from the MOLE back to InSight, which could be damaged if they push down on the top of the MOLE with the arm. So the first plan was to place the arm next to the digging MOLE, pinning the MOLE in place. Perhaps this would provide the friction necessary to get it started. However, this proved not to be enough. Next, the team tried to scoop soil into the hole the MOLE had created. This also proved unsuccessful. Finally, in October 2020, a full year later, scientists tried to push the top of the MOLE with the robotic arm. Although this did cause the MOLE to successfully completely bury itself, the hopes that this raised were soon dashed when the team realized that the MOLE would not go any deeper on its own. By January 14th, 2021, the team had given up on the MOLE altogether, although they still felt they'd learned valuable information for future missions about the nature of Martian soils. Fortunately, InSight's other scientific equipment was working much more effectively. SEIS, the seismometer, was doing a much better job in providing a glimpse into Mars's inner workings. SEIS has been listening to the sounds of Mars for over 2 years now, and has detected over 500 different seismic events. Mars does not have tectonic plates like Earth does, but it does have volcanic regions that produce earthquakes from time to time. SEIS can pick up vibrations from these earthquakes, which gives it a clearer idea of the makeup of the planet's mantle and inner core. Scientists have learned 3 interesting things from all this data. First, Mars tends to have frequent but small earthquakes, none more powerful than magnitude 3.7. Scientists are surprised that they've detected nothing more powerful given how frequent smaller earthquakes are happening, and are still piecing together why this might be. Perhaps Mars is more static than was expected, or perhaps we simply haven't been lucky enough to witness a big one. It's too early to tell for certain. Second, the wind hides earthquakes. Because SEIS is so sensitive, it can hear the vibrations caused by the wind, and sometimes this masks the vibrations of small earthquakes, like static on a radio. During the windier parts of Mars's yearly cycle, the number of earthquakes appears to go down, but this is likely just because SEIS isn't detecting them. Scientists are currently planning to use the mechanical arm to bury parts of the seismometer, as this might reduce the interference from the wind.
New 9 Elements Purifying Softener releases trapped residues to restore faded fabrics.
99% of people are living in a delusion. America is in crisis.
Finally, and strangely,
Sorry about that.
these earthquakes are missing surface waves. All earthquakes create waves. 2 of the main types, primary waves and secondary waves, travel through the mantle. However, normally there are also surface waves that run along the surface of the planet crust, and for some reason these have never been detected on Mars. Scientists are still not quite sure why, but wonder if this is evidence of extensive fracturing of the upper 10 kilometers of Mars's crust, which might be diffusing the waves. To find out, we will have to wait and see. InSight has a difficult task ahead of it. Over the 2 years it's been here, dust has built up on its 2 solar panels. Scientists had hoped that dust devils would blow away this wind in cleaning events, but so far this hasn't happened. In February 2021, InSight was only collecting 27% of the power it would have been collecting had the dust not been there, and this is potentially a big problem. Martian temperatures can drop from 0 degrees Celsius during the day to as low as minus 100 degrees Celsius during the night. Without onboard heaters, these temperature swings could really damage InSight's onboard circuitry. So scientists have a delicate juggling act on their hands. They must decide where to send InSight's dwindling power reserves, to the arm, to the size reader, to the radio, or to the vital heaters that keep InSight alive. And with Mars entering its winter period, as well as aphelion, the time in Mars's year when it's furthest from the Sun, they have decided to settle InSight down to hibernate, using its precious power mostly on keeping its circuitry warm and safe. However, scientists are hopeful that come July, as Mars gets closer to the Sun again, InSight can bring its other equipment back online and the science can continue. The data collected by InSight has very real implications for us. Knowing the inner workings of Mars can help us compare that to how Earth operates, which can give us a more complete view of how all the terrestrial planets formed. Another planet of particular interest is Venus, and how we believe it went from a potentially habitable planet to becoming inhospitable. There is a great episode in the Cosmic Journey series on Magellan TV where they deep dive into what happened to our sister planet.
Okay, I think he's getting into a commercial there. So kind of shows InSight's got trouble with its solar panels. It's only getting 27% of its power. So time will tell. I'm going to stop my share and try a share without the optimization for video just to see. The nice thing is I like to see my audience a little bit, and when I'm in that mode there, I don't have that opportunity. So you guys, maybe was the video working for you guys?
Yes.
Everybody?
Yeah.
Sound okay?
Yes, very clear, very.
Yeah, it was working fine.
Okay, I'll be curious if you guys notice any difference now if I do the share without optimizing for video clips. But we'll see how that does. Okay, so we're going to move on to SpaceX topics. Anything anybody wants to talk about Mars there?
One last thing on Mars, Jimmy. The explanation for the nighttime, you were saying that it's like a 2-year cycle that it goes into dark.
Well, I think Mars is in an elliptical orbit, and I think its orbit is about 2 years long for Mars.
Okay.
And that, I think he's just saying that sometimes Mars is closer to the sun, sometimes farther in that elliptical orbit.
With the detection of an active geological environment on the planet, does any potential at all exist that they could possibly find something similar to that of a blooming volcano area where heat's dissipating to the surface or not?
Yeah, that was going to be the primary thing of the mole, trying to figure out how much heat was coming from the center of Mars to the surface. And I know, they made the point that Mars doesn't really seem to have tectonic plates that move around. So when a volcano comes up through the surface, it just keeps building and building for maybe billions of years. That's why Olympus Mons is like the largest volcanic feature in the whole solar system that we're aware of. There's kind of interesting, volcanoes seem to be kind of congregated in certain areas. I know there's a set of 3 of them that you can kind of see on the map. Does that sort of answer your question about volcanoes?
Because again, I would think that could actually lead towards the potential of the cusp areas, especially for the heat dissipation of the chemicals of life, in the most even hazardous environments.
Right.
They've been able to detect things like that in those similar situations. So yeah, it's good that we're detecting there is activity out there, but that makes perfect sense about the giant volcano on Mars. Again, you just cross your fingers and hope maybe a plume will eventually happen eventually, so that we get more information without digging it.
One of the volcanoes would go off, you think?
Or or similar to that. I think there's areas where a volcano gets close to the surface, similar to that of Yosemite, National Park.
Oh yeah, that heat rises. There's mantle areas where there's like a plume underneath the surface where it comes up. Yeah. And I know too that lava tubes seem to be one of the more popular places for potential bases, both on the moon, and maybe we'd find some lava tubes on Mars too for a base.
Sounds like great comparison data. See if there's common elements in Mars and Earth, and who knows?
Right.
Maybe it's different altogether.
Okay, so we're going to move on to SpaceX. I think since we met, SpaceX has landed a Starship, and it didn't explode.
Yay!
So I'm not going to show the whole thing here. The video. It's good to see the audience here. I love to see all my my folks here, but I'm going to fast forward here. Let's see if we can catch it right before it's going to take off.
It's kind of funny when these things happen. Everyone's scrambling and texting each other, going, "Oh, it's happening! Yeah. It's happening!" You're like, "What's happening?" And there's no schedules. You're like,
and remember, this is what NASA picked to land on the moon with people. So I think it disappeared about 23 seconds into the clouds.
Yeah.
And let's see if we got they had trouble with their interior cameras freezing. And it went up about 10 kilometers. And then started its belly flop. So I think frozen.
It's coming up as we get ready for landing.
so
We will
here
light
it's-
3 Raptor engines, flip the vehicle from horizontal to vertical. If things look good, we will shut down 1 Raptor engine and then possibly a second one and land on a single engine in the landing zone. 5 minutes into flight, Raptor continuing to descend. We're coming up on 3 kilometers altitude.
So you got the vibration here because the camera is actually on like a flap like this at the front of it. And let's see if we can catch it coming out of the clouds. Well,
Starship heading back to the landing zone.
Something just doesn't look coordinated about that vehicle. You know, I don't know if it's the engines and the size of the entire vehicle or what. It just, something just looks off about it, but it works.
And what's
Yeah.
funny though, because of the history of this, me and Bertie are watching the landing, and it landed, and it was great.
And
It's up there.
Starbase Flight Control has
But we're
confirmed
all
that you can
staring at it for 20 minutes, making sure it didn't blow up.
yeah, yeah.
Remember,
Yeah,
it's only
'cause-
the top half.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that one
That was
other
the
one
tension.
exploded about 8 minutes after it landed. So landing doesn't mean it's the end of the excitement.
No.
So
That
let's
was the
see.
first time you were all tense, you know, just waiting for it not to blow up. It was kind of fun.
Right, right. So this one was pretty cool. So this was SN15. He's got a SN16 under production. And then his SN20 is going to be paired with a super heavy booster. And that's planned to be an orbital mission. So let's see.
Yeah.
Let's see if we've got anything under this orbital mission part here. Well, this is what it would look like. The 50-meter high Starship would be on top of a 70-meter first stage. And you got to remember this first stage has 28 engines on it.
Wow.
Kind of just like the N1 from Russia that was 0 for 4 on launches. So, you know, the other thing is I think there's like 4,200 metric tons of fuel inside this single booster. So you really hope it gets far up in the atmosphere before it goes off, because I'm sure it would be considered the strength of a tactical nuclear weapon if it blew up on the pad.
Jeez.
So let's see, what else we got here on Starship? I think I've got, let me see if I've got something hiding behind here. That's the one bad thing now that I've got the videos up here. I've got to figure out how to move them to the side spot. Let's see. There we go. So there's this one guy named Brendan on Twitter that does production. So here's SN16. That would be the next one they're going to try to fly. And then SN20 is going to be the one to try to go orbital. And then you can kind of see the size of the super heavy first stage booster. This one's listed as BN2, but I think it should have been BN3. So this SN20 is going to fit on top of this BN2. And at that point, it'll be taller, I think, than a Saturn V rocket. And also remember that the diameter of this is 30 feet, 9 meters. So
Jesus.
if you know
Wow.
my Cape Cod house, it's about 30 feet on a side. So this is like launching a house-sized rocket in diameter and
Cool.
120 meters tall.
Great graph.
Yeah, yeah. So, you know, the amazing thing, I wanted to show a little bit for size. Here's an artist rendering of the lunar starship docking to the lunar gateway, our space station we might put in orbit around the moon.
Yeah.
And here's an Orion capsule with 4 astronauts. So, you know, again, he can put up to 100 people in the cabin area of this thing. And you can just see how it dwarfs the space station.
Yeah.
So again, this thing would land, you know, with the fact that SpaceX won the human landing system contract, the 4 astronauts would launch to the moon on the Orion, dock to the gateway. The astronauts, 2 or 4 of them, would transfer to the Starship, special lunar Starship, and then go down to the moon. And then Starship would bring them back up here. The astronauts would go back to the Orion capsule, and that's how they'd get back and land on Earth.
I'm just blown away. Just the engineering feat of what it's going to take to do that is just unbelievable.
Right.
Well, I pray that everything goes well. I mean, we all wish them well. It's sci-fi. It's just amazing that it's coming to fruition. It's just that they're able to pull this off.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of out there, but you know, I think if NASA hitches their coattails to anybody, SpaceX is a good company, I guess, to make things happen fairly quick.
Yeah.
You know, Musk is saying that 2024 is not off his schedule, but he also thinks he's going to go orbital with the Starship before the end of this year. So a lot of times you got to worry about Elon time, but we'll see how that goes.
Is he planning on launching that from Cape Kennedy?
Right now, he only launches from Boca Chica, Texas. He also bought 2 oil rigs where he'll be able to launch these out at sea, apparently. And, you know, there is some concern about in Boca Chica, if he had a fully fueled Starship and it had a problem on the pad, the cities are a little closer than they need, you know, than they should be. So there's a little bit of concern there.
Yeah, Texas has a lot of dangerous things in close to residential areas too.
Yeah,
they really do.
If he's ever going to get an okay, it's going to be in Texas.
Yeah.
So we'll see. Other interesting news with SpaceX was Crew 2 launched, which is these folks over here. This is the wife of one of the original guys that went up on the DM2 mission. I think it's I think the guy named Doug, that's his wife. And she actually sat, because they reused the capsule for this Crew 2 that they also used on DM2, she actually got to sit in the same seat of the Dragon capsule that her husband sat in. And then if you follow little plush zero gravity toys, Crew 2's zero gravity device was this thing they called Gwyn, a little stuffed penguin. If you remember the history, DM2, the original, or DM1, I think, the original unmanned capsule had a little plushy Earth zero gravity thing. And then the DM2 guys had Tremor, the sequined dinosaur. And then, let's see, Crew 1 had this Baby Yoda from Mandalorian, if you guys follow all the zero gravity things on SpaceX's capsules. And since the last time we met, Crew 1 landed. That's the 4 of them in their suits in the capsule. Here's the toasted marshmallow dragon capsule with the boat coming up to greet it.
Looks like
And
they
then
can't really do it.
the commander, Mike Hopkins, kind of did a little dance when he got out. I was kind of worried that they set the record by a big margin for the longest time an American capsule stayed in space. The previous record was 84 days all the way back in Skylab, and they set the record at 160 and 1/4 days, 167 and 1/4 days. So he did pretty, he's looking pretty good after 167 days in space. And the other interesting thing is, when the DM2 capsule came down, they had a real hard time because of all the pleasure boats around there.
Right.
They kind of fixed the problem by landing in the middle of the night off the Florida coast. And they also had a lot more Coast Guard presence to make sure that the pleasure boats handled the exclusion zone. So there was no issue with boats around the capsule when they came down. And then as things are happening so fast with SpaceX sending crew up there, they've already announced the Crew 3 group that's going to go up, I think, October 23rd of this year. And is it just me, but this is the 4th person that's going to be on Crew 3. And doesn't it look like our astronauts now are just in high school or something? So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, senior class right there. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, NASA was holding out the 4th seat on there, hoping that Russia would maybe send a cosmonaut up there. Again, NASA would like cosmonauts to fly on Dragon and US astronauts to fly on Soyuz. That way you always have one person from the country to man the 2 halves of the space station. But I think, kind of whiny little Russia is still upset that we're not paying $80 million to send our astronauts up on a Soyuz. So they're kind of kicking and screaming about getting onto the Dragon capsule. But maybe that'll change with the Crew 4 mission. We'll see. So the other thing happening with SpaceX was we just sent up a cargo mission, CRS-22.
Well, they're just hopping.
Yeah. And the cool thing is it's got, let me get the statistics here. It's got 7,300 pounds of cargo. 4,300 pounds of that is in the pressurized capsule area. And then they've got 3,000 pounds of solar arrays. They're bringing up these new rollout solar arrays to the space station. So it can, some of the original solar arrays now are over 20 years old, and their power generation capability has degraded. So SpaceX on its cargo missions is going to send 2 of them up at a time. And this is what they look like in the trunk section of the Dragon capsule. So the remote manipulator arm will come in here, grab one of these, and then the 6 new rollout arrays are going to go 3 on the right and 3 on the left here, and they're going to roll them out kind of almost right on top of the old arrays. And when they get done with all 6 of them here, they'll generate more power than these bigger arrays originally did. It's just amazing how much technology changes in a decade or two. These new arrays are really great.
Is that overlapping the existing ones?
Yeah, they say there's might be about a 10-degree incline between the two, but they've got, the astronauts did an EVA where they put some sort of triangular shaped thing here that will help bridge the gap between here and here.
Cool.
And the other thing on the thing there, I was happy to hear they're sending up 3,000 tardigrades.
Oh, really?
There you go.
So
there you go, Sylvia.
water bears. You know, I have a feeling if the human race is ever going to go to other stars, they'll probably have to do gene modification to give us tardigrade genes. Because, you know, tardigrades can survive boiling water, they can survive freezing temperature. You can dry them out for a few years and then reconstitute them with a little water. They can survive unbelievable amounts of radiation. So they got a lot going for them.
Well, I hope it's got a picture of Silvio on the package that they're going.
That's right.
Like Newman with his sauces. Huh?
Yeah. And the other thing is they got baby squid on there too, because they want to study the interaction. Apparently the squid eventually get a bacteria in them that actually helps them kind of live their life the best that can be. And they just want to see how those bacteria kind of get into the baby squids and make sure the process still works well in zero gravity. But to kind of give you an idea how big these arrays are, they're 60 feet long, and here's one of them opened up.
Holy cow.
Yeah, just to think that gets all rolled up on this thing and then just deployed by, I guess, pulling out, you know, some sort of guy wired arrangement to pull that out to its full extension.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's very cool.
So let's see, I think that's all we got. Yeah. So the other last thing I wanted to share SpaceX is they've now launched one Falcon 9 rocket 10 times. And if you take a look at this Falcon 9, they don't paint it between recoveries. So this thing looks like it's been charcoal broiled about 15 times in somebody's backyard here. But just amazing that, you know, I think the first Falcon 9 launch actually occurred just 11 years ago. It happened on, it happened on today, June 4th, 2010. So we just, tonight we're celebrating 11 years of Falcon 9 launches. And they've actually launched the Falcon 9 now 200 times. So it's quickly catching up with the Soyuz as far as being the most workmanship. They've recovered the first stage of the Falcon 9 86 times now. You know, and that's how this one actually was launched and recovered 10 times. So this is the fleet leader. And it's just amazing. They've kind of cornered the market on launches. SpaceX has launched 17 orbital missions this year, which kind of outpasses, I think, just about all the countries of the world too.
Hey, Jim, do you have
Yeah.
an idea? Do you have an idea of when the next Falcon 9 Heavy is due to launch?
There's 2 of them scheduled to launch. There was a little bit of delay. I don't have it at the tip of my fingers, but I'll
Well,
check
maybe
on
next
it.
meeting.
I'll check on that for next meeting, or I'll dash you an email.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Okay. Let's see. So we're making some progress here. Move on to NASA. We've just celebrated Biden's first 100 days. There's a short little video here. Let me see how this plays. Let me know if this doesn't play as good for you.
Touchdown confirmed. Perseverance safely on the surface of Mars. Hemos llegado. Perseverance llegó.
I'm so proud of you guys. I watched it with bated breath like, millions of other people around the world.
That's the rover. That is the rover, and I'm here with it right now.
It's a legacy of ambition and bravery, and one of equity, kindness, generosity, mentorship, and belief in our nation's future and in the future of mankind.
You are inspiring us, and you are reminding us of what is possible when we dream big and when we think big.
Through the Artemis program, the United States government will work with industry and international partners to send astronauts to the surface of the moon.
NASA has chosen SpaceX to return us to the moon.
Altimeter data confirm that Ingenuity has performed its first flight of a powered aircraft to another planet.
Get to the chopper!
Sean, we have you loud and clear. Welcome to the International Space Station.
This is really, really spectacular.
And liftoff.
Endeavour launches once again. 4 astronauts from 3 countries on Crew 2, now making their way to the one and only International Space Station.
I had a group of folks in my office not too long ago, and I have in a shelf in my Oval Office a moon rock. And they walked over and said, "This is actually a moon rock from the moon?" And I jokingly said, "You ain't seen nothing yet. Wait till you see what comes home from Mars."
So pretty cool little flash and bang there. Another NASA thing is Bill Nelson just got confirmed unanimously. This was probably the smoothest party nomination of anything. Even Ted Cruz voted for him. So I never seen complete. Nobody voted against him at all. And the other cool thing is when he took his oath of office, he actually had Charlie Bolden, the previous administrator under Obama there. And then Bolden was holding up a little computer that had Jim Bridenstine on it. So the previous two NASA administrators kind of were behind him, thinking he'll be doing pretty good. Now, Nelson's 78, so he's a little long in the tooth there, but he's definitely been involved with the space program. In fact, his family have their original homestead in Florida is at the end of the shuttle landing runway. So when he's up at launch pad 39, he actually can see his family's original homestead there. So, you know, he grew up right next to Kennedy Space Center, and I think he's going to be a good guy. I don't think I got time to play it, but he did a good speech to the workforce about what a great thing NASA is. The other thing on NASA just came out with the new budget, the president did, and it looks like a pretty positive behavior. I think NASA's up 7% 2022 proposed versus 2021. And Biden's pushing all the right buttons as far as I'm concerned. He's really concentrating on science. Science really got a push. STEM education was actually increased. If you look at STEM here, it got a 16% increase. That's opposed to the previous administration that zeroed it out every year, only to have Congress put it back in. So, you know, if you look here, the human landing system got a 41% bump in funding. Biological and physical science, 38%. Now, James Webb is getting lower funding, but that's because the testing and all that stuff should be done. Now it's just going to be to launch and operate the telescope, which is much less cost. And, you know, Biden also announced that there's going to be a new fleet of Earth observation satellites, I think 5 of them, that are going to be called the Earth exploration system there. So he's
Hey, yeah. Hey, Jim?
Yeah.
With the James Webb, did they make an announcement as to why there was going to be a delay? Was I just not listening? Or did they make it public?
Yeah, they did. And I've got that kind of as my closing thing there. So if I can just delay you there.
You take your sweet time. I got all night. I'm retired, remember?
So, okay, you know,
you guys are pretty lucky.
Yep. Bottom line is Biden is asking $24.8 billion for NASA this coming fiscal year that I think starts in October. The year that we're in right now, they got $23.2 billion. So it's a pretty good bump. Let's see if I wanted to say anything more. You know, it's funding the Mars sample return in 2026. The one thing they are canceling is the Sophia, the 747 that had that infrared telescope on it. And they just feel like the $85 million budget for that device is just not returning the best science that it could. So that's really the only thing he is canceling. Excuse me for my cough here. I was going to touch a little bit on the Starliner. If you remember, we funded 2 different capsules.
Right.
You know, Boeing was supposed to have the Starliner going. And it's just amazing that that thing still has not completed its unmanned flight. But it's scheduled to go up July 30th for a 4 to 8 day stay on the space station and then land in the Utah desert. And we'll just kind of hold our fingers. Again, the cool thing about the Starliner is it comes down on airbags, and it is a ground landing, so that'll be a little different. A lot easier to extract the astronauts and get your supplies out rather than having to haul it up onto a boat, things like that.
Yeah, I'd say Boeing is overdue for some good news.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So we'll keep our fingers crossed. And then the other interesting thing, and I wish Dean was with us because I know he's a Venus guy. NASA just picked 2 Venus missions, one called Da Vinci Plus and one called Veritas. Da Vinci Plus is going to be a little titanium thing that's going to land on the surface and transmit all the way down. It might be in the atmosphere for about an hour on parachute, and then then they'll cut the parachute and just maybe kind of hit the surface at 20 to 25 miles an hour. They don't know if it'll survive the hit, but if it does survive the impact, it should be able to last for maybe 10 or 20 minutes before the 900 degrees and 90 times our atmosphere pressure kind of crumples it up into a little tiny can. So that's Da Vinci. It'll do great stuff looking for stuff in the atmosphere. It should be able to determine whether that phosgene gas that we saw in the atmosphere is truly there or not. That was where, maybe there was bacteria in the upper atmosphere of Venus. So it should have answer that. Now, Da Vinci is an acronym for Deep Atmosphere Venus Investigation of Noble Gases, Chemistry, and Imaging Plus. Let's see, I got the, Imaging
Holy acronym,
Plus.
Batman.
Yeah. So if I ever have a trivia contest, keep that in mind. I might ask you to
I don't
tell
think
me
I'll
what
ever
Da
remember
Vinci.
noble gases.
Yeah, what Da Vinci stands for. Now the other thing is Veritas. Veritas is going to be just an orbiter, but it's going to map. It's going to be able to look through the clouds and map the surface of Venus 100 times more detailed than anything we have now, and should be able to determine a lot about the geology. They think billions of years ago, Venus might have had an ocean, and by analyzing some of the gases, they think they'll be able to figure out if it truly did have an ocean or not. So Veritas is just an orbiter, but it's going to map it in exquisite detail. Now we're going to have a bit of a wait. I think these things aren't going to happen until the late 2020s. Let's see. I think Veritas might be in 2030, and no, Veritas would launch in 2028, but it might take 2 years to get there. So maybe its science mission would start in 2030. Da Vinci Plus, again, that'll launch in 2032. So we've got a long way to wait, but it's good to see that kind of our sister planet, where the U.S. hasn't sent a mission in 30 years, is going to kind of get a little more attention to detail here. Venus is so similar to the Earth. I think we have a lot to learn about it. Why Venus went one way, and Earth seems to be the Goldilocks between the cold Mars and the super hot Venus. So we'll see. I'm going to skip over this little Venus 101 here. A little sad news, another Apollo astronaut died. Mike Collins, the astronaut that stayed on the service module when Buzz and Neil went down to the surface, passed away at the age of 90.
Wow.
So our Apollo astronauts are really getting up there. Let's see, I think I had a little bit of how many are still kicking. So only Buzz Aldrin's left from the original Apollo 11. And of the 24 men who circled or landed on the moon, now only 10 are alive. And the youngest of them is 85. You know, I don't know where the Dallas betting money's going to be, but we got to get back to the moon if we want any of the Apollo astronauts to be able to share it with us. So, you know, one of the big controversies was SpaceX winning this human landing system contract. NASA, you know, there was the race of the three, the Blue Origin national team had their entry in it. A company called Dynetics was in it. And then SpaceX had this version of their Starship in it. And because the Starship is such an ungainly thing, you couldn't believe that this thing could land somewhere on the moon that doesn't really have a landing pad. You know, how's something that tall going to be able to stick the landing and stay there? You know, the astronauts will need this enormous elevator system to get down to the surface because they're all up here. But so everybody thought SpaceX was going to be third in a race of three, and they would be the only one not picked, that NASA would pick the other two. But because Congress has been kind of putting the human landing system on the cheap, and SpaceX bid only $2.9 billion for their lander, NASA said, well, we'll go with SpaceX because we got the money to do it. And caused a lot of controversy. Blue Origin and Dynetics, of course, have launched protests, and the human landing system money has been frozen now, at least till August or September. But SpaceX doesn't care. They're developing this rocket with or without NASA help. NASA help will keep it moving great, but they're going to do it whether NASA wants to give them money or not. And again,
it's sworn Blue Origin had, I swear, everything was lining up where it looked like Blue Origin literally had it as a ringer. And I was just stunned when they chose SpaceX.
Right. And NASA even let everybody kind of rebid the contract to kind of try to fit in the money that was available. And again, SpaceX came in cheapest, Blue Origin came in second, and Dynetics was actually the most expensive. And the bad thing is the Blue Origin people were asking for a lot of money up front, which technically wasn't even allowed in the bid. So they could have been rejected just on having an invalid project bid. And Dynetics coming in more expensive than Blue Origin, NASA kind of noted that that Alpaca lander was way too heavy for its engines, and they had no plan on how they were ever going to lighten it up or change the engines. And it's amazing how SpaceX kind of came out smelling like a rose. So we'll see. You know, there's the Congress has a knack of doing some pretty creative things. And one thing, this senator from a Democrat from Washington State, you know what Blue Origin's home base is, happens to be Washington. She has figured a way to add a clause to something called the Endless Frontiers Act, which is supposed to keep the U.S. Scientifically competitive with China. She's figured out how to add a clause to that that would get $10 billion more for the human landing system out of this Endless Frontiers Act. And I'm sure that's a way to pick Blue Origin as the second company. But I'm not sure I want to have that the way we move forward in this. So we'll just have to see how it goes. But you know, the other thing in this Endless Frontiers Act is some guy from senator from Mississippi is making NASA develop the more advanced second stage on the SLS rocket faster than NASA really needs it. And of course, the only reason why he wants that is because the rocket has to be tested in Mississippi, and he represents that Mississippi testing area, the Stennis testing area for rockets. So again, you know, the pork that sometimes these bills get tacked on, I don't see why we've got space stuff on inside this Endless Frontier Act, but you know, sometimes the drama that occurs in Washington, D.C. is still on its way. Wanted to do a real quick shout out. There was a new YouTuber called Apogee Space that has done some wonderful kind of longer videos on HLS and SLS. And if you ever get a chance, I'll, in my notes, put a link to him. We won't have time tonight to kind of show his thing.
So,
and then the other.
So where is SLS in all this?
You know, the human landing system, SpaceX would launch that lunar Starship to the moon orbit. It would dock either with the Gateway or directly with an Orion capsule that has the 4 astronauts. And the SLS is how Orion and the 4 astronauts get in the moon's vicinity. They transfer from the Orion to the Starship. The Starship takes them down to the surface. Starship brings them back up into orbit. The astronauts go back into the Orion capsule, and then that gets sent back and splashes. So right now, that's where SLS is, just getting the Apollo and the astronauts to lunar vicinity. So the award for SpaceX is to do a unmanned landing on the moon first with a Starship, and then after that they'd launch a second one, and that would be actually the one that lands at maybe the south pole of the moon and takes the astronauts down to the surface. So the human landing award for SpaceX is 2 Starships, both going to the moon. The first one unmanned. The second one, it'd be unmanned until it gets to the moon, and then it would take the astronauts down. So it's been kind of interesting to see Bezos and Musk kind of going at it. So let's see, I'm going to fast forward to see if I can catch Musk and Bezos kind of bantering.
Today we'll give you back-to-back SpaceX updates. Our first segment will be based on Elon Musk throwing a sarcastic comment to Blue Origin regarding NASA's human landing system. After that, we'll talk about SpaceX sending water bears and baby kids to the space station. Then we'll move on to SpaceX sending their reused booster to Vandenberg Air Force Base, and last but not least, SpaceX being dominant and monopolistic in space. So, let's begin our first segment. Drama continues to rise for NASA's HLS program as SpaceX CEO once again trolled off Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin on Twitter. First, let's take a quick look at how things were between the companies in the past few months. In April, SpaceX secured a $2.9 billion contract from NASA to develop the lunar version of Starship. According to the plan, SpaceX's lunar Starship will land 2 astronauts on the south pole of the moon in more than 50 years after the Apollo 17 moon landing. Later that month, Dynetics and Blue Origin, who also competed for lunar lander contract, filed against NASA's decision to select only one service provider for the mission. Not long after that, the U.S. Government Accountability Office, or GAO, took the matter into their hands and decided to perform an investigation by early August until NASA put a hold on the contract. At this time, when everyone thought the matter was over, Blue Origin brought it up in a recent Twitter post. On Thursday, May 27th, Blue Origin tweeted, "The Human Landing System program needs competition, not the delay of starting over. The national team has an open architecture, deep experience, massive self-funded investments, and a safe, low-risk design to return to the moon. Let's go, #Artemis." In response to that tweet, Musk sarcastically questioned Blue Origin about its cost for the lunar landing system. For the low price of ... As we know, SpaceX offered the lowest price for the landing system, which is one of the reasons that NASA chose only SpaceX among the 3 service providers. SpaceX's total evaluated price of $2,941,394,557 was the lowest among the offers by a wide margin. Blue Origin's total evaluated price was significantly higher than this, followed by Dynetics' total evaluated price, which was significantly higher than Blue Origin's, the agency stated in its selection statement. Musk and Bezos both have greater visions for future spaceflight programs. However, considering the current market, there's no doubt that SpaceX is much more ahead than Bezos' Blue Origin. Let's move on to our next segment.
So, it's kind of
Is it true that SpaceX is sending water bears?
Guys, kind of giving each other a dig. So let's see. I think I'm going to have to lop off space tourism and just a little bit about the James Webb Space Telescope, like I promised Phil. It actually, the delay from October 31st to the middle of November is not due to the telescope. The problem is they picked an Ariane 5 rocket to launch it into space. At the time they picked it 10 years ago, the Ariane 5 had the best performance and success rate of any rocket in existence. But the problem has been that the last 2 launches, there's been a vibration problem with the fairing deployment, and they're kind of concerned about that. So what ESA, who flies the Ariane 5, is supposed to do is launch at least 2 times with the fix to the fairing before they launch the James Webb Space Telescope. So that's why, to get those 2 extra launches in before mid-November, that's the delay. So the telescope has been folded up and it's getting ready to get shipped down. I remember one time last meeting we talked about why aren't they sending it on an airplane. They said it's too big to fit in a C-5A. And anyway, if it was able to fit in that enormous Russian plane, the problem is there's actually 5 bridges between the airport and the launch facility that would not support a truck carrying the telescope. So you have to remember that this is launching from French Guiana down in the northern part of South America, and infrastructure down there is not that great. So so that's why you know, sending it by boat is what has to be done. So so we'll see. You know, now we're talking about mid-November. Phil, you are correct. They didn't really put this as any headlines in any newspapers, but it is out there for you know, you can find the information about it.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm really excited. I had a little video by a cosmologist named Dr. Becky that would talk a little bit about this, but I'll put it in my notes. Again, we don't quite have time. And the other thing I wanted to mention, again, they think James Webb, because it's working in the infrared, they're going to be able to look back at maybe galaxies as young as maybe only 150 million years after the Big Bang, which is just amazing to go back that far in time.
Yeah.
We'll have to see. But the other great news is OSIRIS-REx is heading home from the asteroid Bennu, and it's got its sample. They didn't spin the rocket to determine how much a sample they have, because they were worried that part of the sample was kind of maybe getting released. So they've got anywhere from a half to a 1 pound sample of 4.5 billion year old rocks. And it'll be interesting. This asteroid Bennu is actually a near Earth object. It's a 500-meter diameter asteroid that every 6 years kind of comes close to the Earth. So there's like a 1 in 2007, a 1 in 2,700 chance of an impact sometime in the future, like in the late 2100s. And you know, I think the better we understand what it's made of, the better we might have a chance to do some sort of mitigation. To a 500-meter object probably could take out the better part of a continent. So you know, if it's headed our way, we better figure out how to do it. And we've got a lot of missions coming up that are heading to asteroids. There's a mission called Lucy, which is going to launch in October of this year. That's going to fly past 7 Trojan asteroids that are ahead and behind the planet Jupiter in its orbits. Maybe about 60 degrees ahead and behind the planet is a Lagrange point. And if an asteroid kind of gets in this Lagrange point of Jupiter, it kind of gets captured and stays there. So that's how that Lucy mission is going to be able to go past 7 different asteroids. And then we're also going to launch a mission called DART in November of this year. That might be, we'll have to see if that's a Falcon Heavy launch. I don't know if they mention it here or not, but we'll see. DART is going to actually go to the asteroid Didymos, and Didymos has a little moon called Didymorphos, and they're actually going to slam DART into this little moon and see how much they can affect the motion of that little moon around the bigger asteroid Didymos. So that'll be really interesting. And then the third asteroid mission that's coming up called Psyche is going to launch in early 2022. And that's going to visit the asteroid Psyche. And Psyche is believed to be the core of a much larger asteroid. It's almost like a solid hunk of metal. And it's kind of interesting. People have analyzed the amount of metal in Psyche, and if you sold it at the street level, it's worth $10 quintillion.
Wow.
And if you remember, there's 1,000 quadrillions and a quintillion, and 1,000 trillions in a quadrillion. So that gives you a little idea how many zeros behind the dollar sign. So I had to lop off a whole section here, but I'll put it in my notes. You know, it's going to be, well, or maybe we'll even delay it for when we get together in July, because it's going to be an exciting year for space tourism. If you check my guess for the number of people going into space, since our last meeting, my guess has gone up by 9 because Virgin Galactic seems like they're going to start sending up people real soon. Blue Origin is launching its first set of people on its capsule, suborbital capsule. That's going to happen on July 20th, which is the Apollo 11 moon landing anniversary. So Blue Origin hasn't announced the price on their seats, but an auction of one of the seats on that capsule is up to $3 million right now.
Wow.
So we'll see. Again, Virgin Galactic is going to charge $250,000 for its 17-minute trip from when you drop it from the carrier plane to when it lands on the runway down in New Mexico. So we'll see. You know, so Blue Origin's going to send people, Virgin Galactic sending people. The Russians now are sending up some actress and her director. Plus, they're going to send up a tourist, a Japanese tourist billionaire, who also has bought a Starship trip around the moon. So, so that'll be interesting. So my guess for the number of people Russia's launching is going up. And, you know, like Scott Manley said, we're going to have manned, China's sending up their first crew of 3 in June. We'll have the Chinese space station manned, the ISS manned with anywhere from 7 to 11, or maybe 14 people at any given time. And then Dragon is going up as a standalone capsule with the Inspiration 4 mission. That could be up there at the same time. So we maybe really will blow the doors off of that 13 as the max number of people in orbit at any one time. So it's exciting. I appreciate you all guys all staying with me all the way to 10. It was a 2.5-hour marathon.
It was a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, it was very interesting. Time for me flew by.
I appreciate that. And again, if some of the things I had to gloss over, I'll have in my notes, and you guys can click on it when moments get the light and you have your time. So anything anybody wants to add?
No, I'm good.
No, I don't think so.
I'm good.
Then I'll say thanks for joining us. Ad Astra to everyone. You know, keep looking up to the stars.
Stay well.
We are done.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you.